I'm thrilled, as part of our series of interviews for the Housing Festival this year, that we've got a bit of time with Mayor Marvin Rees and Councillor Cabinet Lead Nicola Beech, Cabinet Lead for Spatial Planning and Urban Design for the city. So we've obviously got to know each other a little bit over the last 3 years working on some of the Housing Festival projects, and I've been really inspired by the vision and the sort of appetite of Bristol to lead, to innovate, to take opportunities, to go first. And I want to just firstly just say thank you to you both for your willingness to engage in that and really help drive, I think, innovation forward in the city. But you know, we come at this at a really challenging time. We've got COVID-19 as a challenge for the city, we've got the resilience issues, we've got the climate issues. And so today it was an opportunity just to sort of talk a little bit at length about some of those issues that we're facing. And so in the context of that resilient city, the pressures of COVID, can we just start by sort of looking at the additional pressure or the highlighting of the challenge that we face in the city for housing, that COVID is kind of, you know, and even the context of Black Lives Matter, the sort of the human side of this, which of course that we always talk about housing, we're talking about people's lives. What are the things that you've seen that we need to be even more focused on in terms of tackling that inequality and tackling that human need for housing in the city that COVID-19 has really, really highlighted?
Would you like to go first?
No, you go first.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think there's always two strands to this. I think as a member of the executive, it was just quite an awe-inspiring time to be a part of an executive, I think, going through COVID and seeing the front line of the council just absolutely throw themselves at this challenge as a city. And I think even though my cabinet is around planning and city design, you know, it's very private sector and public sector partnership led. I think just seeing some of the services from the people services and bits of the council that I don't interface with necessarily on a day-to-day basis kind of deploy themselves and redistribute their roles, and you know, going into the cash hall and all the things that were happening was just actually awe-inspiring, to be honest with you. And so I think from a housing perspective, what it showed us firstly, I think, is you know, when all is said and done, those four walls in which you live in kind of really could make or break your future. And I think it really demonstrated that, you know, when we look at kind of our response to rough sleeping and the way in which we're able to get those people into somewhere safe and warm quickly, and you just hope that actually as we go through this, kind of how that might pivot kind of the city's reaction to homelessness and rough sleeping, and that kind of absolute empathy for the fact that, like, that is no life. And we know that, we all know that, but actually it was really kind of at the forefront of people's minds. I think the other thing around key workers, which you'll hear us talk about lots, obviously, it really redefined what an important worker is. And I think that relationship between salary, the type of house you live in, the kind of job you do, this pandemic just shifted people's thinking on that, and all of a sudden they kind of looked at either side of their neighbours' houses and thought, oh wow, you're still going out to work, you're doing a job that really makes a difference because you're still working, you're doing the bins, or you work at Sainsbury's or whatever. And I think that made it interesting. From a planning perspective, it was, I think it's really, really, and still to this day, makes us reflect on the type of house we want to build and the kind of house we need in the city. The whole idea of having space to work wasn't necessarily a thing before. It was a luxury if you had somewhere to sit and work, you know, and the idea people are kind of grabbing a space in the back bedroom, sat in their kids' bedroom trying to work. And actually, as we start to look at density and the way we build, the combination of having somewhere to work and also the absolute importance of private open space just absolutely comes to the floor. So you'll know there's a big debate about PRS, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, and that access to your own space. That when all is said and done is yours and it's outside, just makes you realise in a pandemic how unbelievably important that is. And I think that's left a lot of people in all cities and all urban spaces really reflecting on whether or not certain housing models and that lack of private space, you know, whether that's something we should be pushing for more and more with every scheme that we see.
Yeah, and just picking up on that then, what are the kind of the learning and the challenges about the implementation? Because we all know housing does not happen overnight. It's not you turn it on here and it comes out the next day over there. So what are the things that we're, as a city, going to have to grapple with? Because this is all about, you know, unintended consequences. We can have this, but we might. So what are the things that strategically you're suggesting therefore become right to the sort of priority list for the future, the debate around what are the type of houses? What are the things that for you have come to that fore?
I think across the UK, the bizarre situation pre-COVID was the fact that the type of housing stock that was appearing in the marketplace, policy didn't prepare for anyway. So when you're looking at build to rent, when you're looking at the private rented sector, the idea of pocket living, these other kind of tensions and challenges that were coming into Bristol, which actually, you know, definitely pre-COVID, I think that the key to good housing stock is mix and balance. And so I'd never turn anyone away. Let's actually have a conversation, explain to me what your housing product is and who is your market and how does this work. But post-COVID, there is a moment to pause. But the benefit is the fact that our policy, like the rest of the UK's policy in this space, isn't up to date with the type of stock that we've got coming to the city anyway. Yeah. And so it gives us that chance to reframe, to your point, what type of housing do we need? And I think community, and it's an obvious thing to say, absolutely more important than ever before. The idea of being able to very quickly walk to where you need to get the things that you need, the basic provisions, you know, this, and that brings back the mix and balance, what's going on at the ground floor, you know, is that, what type of shop is that a useful thing that everyone can access in that community, particularly in our city where I think we've got lots of brownfield opportunities, which if you've got the kind of value of adding those sites together, you're making new communities. And so how do you achieve that genuine mix and balance? And that in itself comes with tensions when you look at individual plots of land and who has what or where. But I think it reinforces more than ever the need to plan these places more holistically when you're building these new communities and really make sure it's all there.
That's strategic oversight across those deliveries.
And when you look at it as a whole, it works, and you know, you're not just picking off sites individually, and I think that it reinforces the way we've approached it since 2016, and I'm really proud of that actually.
If you look at the relationship between housing and COVID vulnerability, for example, it just really stresses as Nicola's been saying, you know, the importance of housing as a key policy tool. You know, the management of our current stock, our landlord services, is now going over to Helen Godwin, who is the Cabinet Lead for Women and Children and Families. We think there's an amazing alignment between us and the outcomes we want to have for women, children and families, and what we do with our own housing. But the you know, overcrowded homes being the places where COVID spread, and the risks it brings to wider society. I think too, just related to that, the inequalities and the fractures in our society that have been shown. Again, housing is the tool. Mixed communities, places that bring people together, that proactively build communities, but even just having enough housing, right? One of the classic points of hostility is you come over here and you take our houses, right? So actually bringing houses through in and of themselves is a good. And dare I say also about the reality check that we've now received from having a global shock, we have to be thinking about climate and ecology. So our housing stock needs to deliver for life, but human life and human community, but also planetary life and planetary survival. So we need it to come in a way that is more resilient to future shocks, but also enables us to live a lifestyle that means that we make less of a contribution to the likelihood of future shocks as well.
I mean, one of the things that, and we've talked about a little bit, is this sort of, you know, housing is that tool to enable the improved physical and mental health of the population. There's such a correlation, and certainly with the One City plan, and how do you start to get that strategic oversight? But you talk about supply housing, which of course at the end of that you want the right supply housing in the right places for the right need. As you said, there's different needs and different. One of the things that you ran your administration on was this big ticket item of 2,000 homes and 800 homes a year. You know, you and I both know that is a strap line. You've not hit that target. Can we just talk a bit about that, about what you've learned over the last few years in the administration, what I suppose the things that are now in place that you think can help achieve that for the future? Because the reality is, you know, these things don't happen overnight. But there's more than a story of just the numbers. Can we just talk a bit about that? So what are the things, particularly over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, that you think you've sort of from one position, how you've moved it forward and what the future looks like? Are you optimistic for the future? What are the things that you now believe can start to really help deliver that supply of housing and the right? Because it's not just numbers, right? This is more than a numbers game.
I mean, I'm not an optimist. I describe myself as a person of hope. But that's a conversation for another day. But bearing in mind, I would also just say that we're looking at that target being knocked down the road is clearly challenging times for delivery, impact on the construction sector as well, that we and government that we depend on for delivery. But we were going good guns, and we're looking at those numbers being reached next year. But I think what it has done is confirm a few things. One is you have to have clear leadership to make a explicit political goal. I remember that housing was the first political appointment I made in the cabinet. we looked for all the others, but we just said, right, here's the political lead for housing. This is the person to talk to navigate the intricacies of local government. This is the person who's going to advocate, this person's going to talk to government. And we invested that position with power and influence and profile. And that, through my commitment, Paul's commitment in the cabinet, we began to transform our relationship with the sector as a whole. Yeah. So part of it was also about the quality of relationships, isn't it? Just do they believe we're the kind of people you can come and talk to and work with? And I think one of the principles is things are going to go wrong, but are we the kind of people you can talk to when things do start to go wrong, right? Because that's inevitable. And we've set ourselves out, I think, we've set out to be good partners. We've also tried to be clear, and I think this is, again, a learning, intuitively we understood it, but a learning as well, is to be really clear on your values. So we have said to people, if you're interested in coming here, helping us deliver the Sustainable Development Goals, deliver affordable homes, deliver on the climate emergency and the ecological emergency, you'll be welcome. The alternative is also true. You will not be welcome if you're just coming here to make a fast buck and run off. And we'll do everything we can to work with people on our land who are delivering for the common good, and they got to get a return. We recognise that. But the alternative is also true. If you're not that kind of organisation, then this is not a city in which you're going to find a welcome. But we've found a lot of the people that come to see us actually want to be involved in doing stuff that's more than getting a return. I don't want to be doughy-eyed about it, but I think there is a lot of pride in the profession, isn't it? People who want to deliver excellent products and want to look back and think, actually, my job was worthwhile. And we've said, we want to help you do that.
And I think the other thing, so my two, I guess, takeaways of it is the importance of having a goal, to be blunt with you, and setting that yardstick to say, this is where we want to be. Right. Because pivoting the machine of the local authority in those early days, I mean, I joined the cabinet in 2017, so Paul had a year's run at this, but even when I joined and we were trying to set up Gorham Homes, and we were just trying to understand the policy framework for that, how do we get that legal entity up and running, and how do we get sites through the hopper quickly so we can get on the ground? Just an absolute eye-opener in terms of how, and it was that goal that made that pivot happen, because there was no ambiguity about where we want to get to. This is it. There's nothing else that really matters. Lightning rod together. We need to get to these homes being built and people living under a safe roof. And so I think that was really important and really sort of highlighted that absolute direction. I think the second thing is when we meet the development community in Bristol, and I hope and I see the pride that Marvin talks about, that we're also up for sort of looking at different ways of doing things, different models, and particularly in a world by the time this recording goes out, in terms of the planning environment and the planning landscape and the future of planning in the UK, actually it is a partnership with the kind of, the backstop of going through the planning system and running the gauntlet, so to speak. That's not a world we want to be in anyway. We want, as Marvin says, we want partners that can sit in an office with us and talk to us and actually be collaborate and collaborate.
Collaborate. Not clobbering us.
the clobberings at the end. Over this stuff, because actually, you want to get the best outcome. Right. They do need a return. Of course they do. They're not in the room for any other reason fundamentally, but they do care. And I think that's the difference. And it very quickly separates the development community into the people that see a long-term opportunity in the city, and they can see that pipeline. And for us, that's absolutely in our benefit to have some really strong partners that will deliver again and again and again. And that's the kind of partnership.
And just to pick up on that, again, I think one of the things that we're trying to sort of help with the narrative of for the city, because this is the housing crisis is a city crisis, right? It belongs to the people of Bristol. You can't just look to the administration here to you fix this, because we're all invested in some way in the city. So one of the things we see regularly is that if you just read the press, we tend to focus on the bad news stories of housing. We've got an incompetent local authority on the one hand, or an evil developer on the other, but we very rarely talk about when have things been done well, when have we got new communities that are thriving, and that's one of the visions for the Housing Festival. Can you just give me an example of some of the things where you're looking back and going, that's where we got it right, that's where we've got a story that we can be proud of, or things coming down the line you're saying, that is an example of the collaboration that you're talking about, because it's happening. Is there some sort of things you want to just put as an example of the kind of collaboration you're talking about?
I can give you a perspective as a ward councillor, really, because those houses that we built on Whitehall Road a while back, it was an old pub that we converted. and you see the families coming in and out of those doors, and actually there's a pub right opposite there called the Red Lion, and we go in that pub, we used to pre-COVID quite a lot, and you'd see people talking about those homes, and you'd see them, and that's the reality of actually saying that happened because of us, and the families that live in there have actually now got their own space, and they're right by amenity, they live in a community, and it'd be the same in St George's Park as we build the new homes there at Hope Rise. And I think for me, as a ward councillor, it's those stories, and I think as councillors, of ward councillors, it is our job to promote those. It is our job to talk about the fact that we're making that difference. You know, there's families in my ward where the kids are doing their homework in the car because there's no space. They live in a flat that's absolutely too small for them, so they do the homework in the car on the dashboard. You know, you see that, and then you see what's happening on Whitehall Road, and you think, actually, you know, that is the future, and it's that simple. And I think for me as a ward councillor, seeing those infill sites, you know, no land is wasted. Let's look at this land in a different way and see actually in every ward, in every part of this city, there are opportunities to build those homes. And I think they're
so quite quickly you get back to this challenge of, you know, how do we build homes where you've got services, where you've got community, and you quite quickly you come up against this issue of density again. You know, and in the context of a housing crisis, which really is about affordability and land supply, a climate crisis, a construction skills crisis. You know, we've got conversations happening in the city about high rise and the density. We've got conversations about Western Harbour, and you know, I understand there are people that are concerned about that, and of course COVID-19 has again asked questions about that. Could we just talk a little bit about the tensions that have to be navigated there, because these aren't black and white issues, these aren't binary choices. How do we get the right supply of housing in the right places, but understand the complexity of density? What's your kind of role as sort of bringing that strategic leadership to the city to get that right? Because you've obviously got planning implementation, planning tools, but there's also the broader conversation. So how do we navigate that to build trust? Because so much of this seems to me about often people don't understand, and therefore it's a breakdown of trust. So how do you navigate that and build trust with people along the journey?
That's a real challenge, isn't it? So I think part of the job is to hopefully give people a framework for understanding what we're actually trying to get, or what challenges we're trying to meet. So there have been situations when I actually been at Western Harbour. I said, all right, I know there's a disagreement, but let's just move upstream and find out if we're all trying to take on the same challenge, and if we agree that's the challenge we're going to take on. We have a housing crisis today. Yeah. Okay, if we can agree that, then we know we need to deliver homes, because not delivering on a housing crisis is not an option. If we don't deliver on it, someday it's going to come and knock on our door, housing riots or whatever, you know. So we have to do that. We have a climate emergency, right? And that means that we do have to try and build close to retail centres, employment areas, entertainment, so we can maximise opportunity for active travel. Right, we have an ecological emergency as well, so we have to build in a way that supports nature. Right. If we can agree on the challenges we take on, now let's look at this piece of land in that context. And the alternatives, if you build like 5 miles away with a zero carbon home, you've kind of lost the benefit. So it's not that anyone is. My hope is that in framing it like that, we're not. People understand the motivation. The motivation isn't to do something in opposition to your local wish. The motivation is to take on this wicked challenge. Now, in the face of that challenge, what would you take on? Now, if you choose to say there is no housing crisis, there is no climate emergency, there is no ecological emergency, then clearly you've got a different framework for coming up with your solution. But if we agree they're all true. And I think, for me, I'm trying to step back away from the conclusion and get back to the challenge. One of the challenges in that, to be perfectly frank, is social media and poor quality journalism. That does like simplistic binary frameworks, does like conflict to generate clicks, but we just have to keep trying to fight through that and turn up in person to have conversations with people, so that hopefully they can understand what we're actually doing, if we have the same understanding of Bristol. Right,
and of course a lot of your role is in a marketplace of housing delivery is to try and influence where there is effectively systemic failure, which it invariably focuses most sharply at that forward blend. And maybe people don't always appreciate that every bit of land in the city is not under there's the planning regime, right? But it's not within your control. So you're a partner of what happens in the city. It would be wrong of me not to talk a little bit about the perception of Bristol as a great city to live in, and sort of the perception of Bristol as a city of innovation. And obviously one of the ambitions of the Housing Festival was how can we kind of help create both for the region but also for the city and the country, kind of this understanding how to engage with MMC, modern methods of construction, so new ways of building, and the sort of the exam question is that really a part of the solution to the housing crisis and the climate emergency and the construction skills challenges? What's been your perception? I mean, I know that both of you would have had some experience of talking to some of these suppliers. You'd have had some experience. You'd have seen the ZPOS Gap, St George's, and obviously the conversations having a look at LNG and some of these other suppliers. What's your initial thoughts? Because we're at the beginning of that marketplace, right? It's quite immature still. There's a lot of questions. One of the problems is, how do you go first, particularly in local government? What's your current views about the opportunity there?
Yeah, I think I can kind of mix together that question and the previous question about density and height, because I think that they're both actually, from my perspective, very close together. In the fact, as to answer your question about MMC, I think we need to see more of it. We need to understand what works, and we just need to actually continue to experiment with some of this stuff so we understand what fits the city. I think quality will always remain a challenge. I think there shouldn't be an assumption that MMC is good quality in terms of urban design, in terms of what happens at the ground floor, how people live, what actually happens when they've moved in and the novelty of their MMC home has gone away. Like, they actually still have the same requirements in any sort of traditional building, and I think that's right. And I think the same applies to the comment about taller buildings and more traditional buildings, I guess, is that we all know, looking around the UK, there are some really rubbish buildings in this country, and the truth is they're not welcome in our city. And so for everything we say about the challenge between the climate emergency and the housing need and the growth, we also expect quality. It's not enough to just have an affordable home. We need to have a good home. And I think the more, as we talk into the sector about the fact that we'll be quite open and we'll support you, we'll help you with kind of our expectations in terms of what's going on at the ground floor and the materiality of those buildings, but we expect it to be good. Our city expects more, and I don't think we should ever be afraid of that, and we're not. And I think the more honest, robust conversations we have and get away from the idea that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and actually there is a difference between a good development and a development, and the more we mature that conversation, it overcomes some of the challenges around kind of building in the centre, it overcomes some of the experimental challenges around doing something a bit different and having a go. And I think that alongside some of the other challenges we may face in future is where we've got, as I say, these collections of sites coming together, is what we absolutely don't want is the feeling of like an anywhere town at the end. There's something in organic growth that makes a place feel real and puts that fabric in. And for me, things like MMC, sort of within a wider development, give you that organic feel, rather than just one homogenous development that's all been brought forward in the same 3-year span, so everything looks the same. And I think we absolutely don't want that in Bristol, and I can't believe any city leader would want that. And so for me, what we do in the Housing Festival, the next stage of that is to put that in the mix with some of the other big developments happening and say, right, what, let's mix this up a bit and let's bring that organic kind of fabric first feel, and I think we can do it, and I'd love to see that happen on some big sites we've got.
That's great. And of course that brings you straight back into the conversation, I suppose, around the economic challenges for the country, for the city, for the nation and the world around COVID-19. Just speak to me a little bit about your thoughts about the place housing has as a sort of driver and an opportunity to help with that local industrial strategy and economic recovery, because of course I presume that it interconnects into so many of those areas. So how does it both become a real area of growth for the city, but also a real area of stimulus for the city? What's your perspective about the opportunities there for Bristol in the next few years?
I think they're big. I mean, our constant point to government, whenever we get the chance, is to ask them to really front load their investment in sustainable infrastructure, green infrastructure for the city, and that includes housing. So it can be a local multiplier, even retrofitting homes. It's a way of transitioning skills. At the moment, keep people in employment, keep wages flowing, which obviously builds some kind of backstop, some New Deal style backstop, into the economy. But also, there's I prefer it as an investment. It's not a cost, is it? Because there's a return on it, and it's a population that is cheaper to run. And I use that in inverted commas. Poverty is expensive. The consequences of family breakdown, poor educational attainment, lost talent, social immobility means that talent never flourishes and doesn't become an active contributor to the economy. People increase more likely to end up in mental health services through poor housing, end up in a criminal justice system. It's expensive not to deliver on the housing crisis. It remains our priority, and it will be for as far as I can see into the future, because again, going back to the points Nicola made earlier on, I've had phenomenal opportunities to meet families who've moved into our houses. I went up to St Anne's, houses that were built on an old former people's home site. As I met these family, 2 children, they'd moved from a tenement block. This is the first time they'd had a garden. I looked at them, I thought everything in their life has gone in the right direction. The likely success of their marriage, their economic sustainability, they had solar panels on the room, the house was efficient, the mental health and the education and attainment of their children, everything went in the right direction. Over in Lawrence Weston, there was an older woman who had a new house, and she wanted us to come in and have a look when we visited. She had her grandchildren to stay for the first time, because in her previous accommodation she couldn't have her grandchildren over. Now, one is think about her own well-being and longevity of healthy years, but the support for her children that she can now provide, and the dignity that she will have. Because it's interesting, I'm involved in the Archbishop of Canterbury's Housing Commission. They did a paper on a theology of housing, and one of the principles was a house isn't just somewhere to live. Part of it is you've got a space to be hospitable, that you can host people. That's part of your dignity, the fullness of who you are. Because about Nicola's point on, what about having good quality houses, a place to work, a place to host. Now she can host her grandchildren. These interactions we've had, meeting people, are just so special, and they just speak to the fact that this is the right priority to have and the right one to meet at the time. Quite apart from housing being one of the biggest drivers of carbon emissions in the city as well, when they're poorly designed and they're inefficient. Yeah,
and I think what's interesting to me in that is that we talk a lot about housing, we talk about numbers, we talk a lot about affordability, and actually what we get right back to this is about people and the transformational impact of secure, good quality housing on generations, right? It's not just that. And I love that stuff. That when we, again, the notion of the Housing Festival is partly how can we celebrate these stories? Because we need to capture and celebrate that actually that's making a real difference, and that gives the motivation to keep going and do something else.
Yeah, I think my ambition with that in the coming years is to actually find ways to capture and measure that effectively and really understand what the output is to Bristol. And I think that, we've had this goal. The goal has been really important to pivot the machine, as I said, but now it's what else do you get for that? What are those other outcomes and outputs, and how do we measure those? And the SDGs has been really effective, even in recent months, really, talking to the development community about, with all due respect, I don't care how you measure it. This is how we measure it, and I'd like you to align to that, please, so we can actually understand what the outcomes look like, and they match in other developers, and we bring the community in, the development community in, to our common language and say, right, these are the kind of things we're looking for. You're not going to solve the problem, of course not, in the same way we can't solve it without you, but let's work together. And
that's back to that strategic alignment, right, around if we can work in this area to fix this problem, then we can. And of course in that, the council has developed its own social value policy, which is another tool that you've got to sort of look at your ability when you're procuring whatever, to look not just at cost.
But I think on that though, just quickly, of course anyone that does planning will know that planning is hard. And that stuff's seen as soft, and that's not soft, that's real. And that's the interesting challenge when, as I said earlier, when you use planning as a backstop, that's not the only thing that matters. And I think the more we have to, I don't know if it's just the sheer number of men that work in the planning sector, I don't know, I'll keep pondering that. But I think we need to think about the other stuff that matters beyond just getting your planning permission and the policies that sit there in the planning world.
In the same way, money's hard, the cost of the project, so we talk quite a bit about the challenge with MMC being, if it's more expensive to buy, is it because it's the same, or is it because actually you're getting a superior quality sustainable products? And I suppose that's what you're talking a little bit about. The numbers hard, they're clear policy guidance, and so how can you influence that? Because that's one level you've got this big machine of the city and development moving. How can you continue to guide and influence that from your positions? Because it's not just about policy, therefore, is it?
No, it's not just about policy, and I think that's where, so from my perspective, kind of even working with Helen Godwin, as I say, our Cabinet Minister for Women and Children, what's been amazing is her bringing like some of her lenses to it, like the Children's Charter, almost pulling me out of my policy backstop, my comfort zone being kind of numbers and figures and facts, and saying, no, hang on a minute, what about this? And I think as we bring the SDGs more into our sort of day-to-day world, and we actually start to understand the individual goals there and what that actually means for us, I'd love to see sort of the one city and planning combine more. I think there's an opportunity there, and I hope that will bring us all out of this idea of what's kind of hard and soft, so to speak. And I think that's going to be, for the whole country, that is going to be a real challenge post-COVID. that actually we can, to do it, I think we do have work to do. We have to put metrics and numbers and we need to almost fight fire with fire and put some hard facts and hard numbers and hard targets against those traditionally softer things.
Yeah.
And then we can see what good looks like, and we can start measuring that.
So you're straight back into using targets to drive change a little bit there as well.
Yeah, you could tell
and taking a punt on them as well, isn't it? So even if we got to get the measures in place, and I think we call on our public health team for some of that. But even when we can't measure it, if we know it's good, we can still put some political weight behind it and say this is what we value. Helen's been a real advocate of child-friendly cities as well. That's saying that if a city is built well for children, it's good for everyone.
It's good, right.
It's safer, it's cleaner, it's more efficient, it's more inclusive, you've got a green space. That's been a real kind of, it's a very simple phrase, right? Child-friendly city, but it has profound implications for the way we think about the city's development.
So just final question for me. The One City Plan, you've got a goal in there, I think, for 2050 that talks about that everyone in the city of Bristol by 2050 will have a secure home living in a community where they feel they can play a part. So it's a really big, bold, you talk about being hopeful, that's a hopeful statement. You know, I love this stuff because I'm like, this is something to aim at. This is absolutely the right, objective that we should be coalescing around and throwing everything into the mix to make happen. There's other people out there that are cynical. What would you say to those that are just seeing that as words, as empty rhetoric, as it's politicking? What's the response to that? Because we need them in the conversation too, right? The administration, the council is a piece of this city, but it's not the whole piece. So how do we build that trust, that confidence, that engagement, so that we're working with rather than working against each other? What would you say to the cynical minded out there at the moment about the opportunity that lies ahead and the challenge?
Well, if I was to say anything at all, because listen, I'm going to say something that's not necessarily wise for a politician to say. There is a proverb that says, don't cast your pearls before swine. And there are some discussions that are not worth having, right? Because that's where people are at. It's not a case that they've looked at a situation, analysed it and thought, this is not likely to succeed. They don't want it to succeed. And I think they have to make space for that. But I think if I was distinguishing between people saying, actually, I like this, I think it's going to be really hard work for you to get there, but I like it, and these are the reasons it's going to be hard work, then the invitation is to come in. We don't claim we've got all the answers. The first job is to point where we're going and agree, is that where we want to go? If that's where we want to go, right, we know it's hard. If it was easy, we'd all be doing it. There'd be no problem, but it's not. So is that where we want to go? Do you think it's the right place to go? Let's have the chat. How are we going to get there and begin to put it down? And what we have done is we have not sat in City Hall with a bunch of council officers and a few politicians coming up with it. We've worked with the city to come up with these aims, to agree that that's where we want Bristol to be. Our job now is to do the phenomenally challenging job of working out how we get there.
That's great. Anything to add to that?
I just think it's also one of the sort of carrying those kind of objectives, even in sort of my day job, but before COVID, but even now virtually, it's kind of helping communities understand where they fit.
Right. Yeah. And
sometimes there's a bit of holding up the mirror to say, look, this is your community and this is great. Look, let's just talk about what's happening over there, or let's talk about what's just happening down the road there that you might not see. But I actually find there's that expression YIMBY, isn't there, which I don't actually like at all, but the idea of, yes, let's do it. And actually what I have to say, of course there's always challenges in planning. You're constantly treading that tightrope between kind of, as you say, sort of different sides of a debate, and you're trying to find the best, most practicable solution and the best outcome for the city. But I think that you'd be surprised in communities how many people are actually incredibly pro-housing. They see it. They see their grandkids not being able to live in Bristol. They see their grandkids having to move out of the city. They see the vulnerability of sort of, especially nowadays, about the idea they could lose their job, or their children could lose their job, and what that means for their rent. The whole generation of renters, that I think COVID has exposed the vulnerability of those people. And so I think personally, of course there's voice, of course there's people throwing rocks, that's life, and that's how it is. But in my experience, even when you're walking that tightrope of planning, I have to say that, I meet people who are like, I can see what you're trying to do here, but we've got to get it right. And I couldn't agree more. And I think that's, for me, I think that people generally see that in Bristol. Yeah,
that's great. I have to say one of the things that's really inspires me, having worked, sort of engaged with a lot of different housing developers in the last 3 years, is I haven't come across really anybody who goes into work to create systemic poverty. The system is challenging. There are incredible complexities in the way that our housing system operates, but most people are going to work because they want to see a positive contribution. And when they come to Bristol, I think it is getting that noise now, isn't it, that people are coming because they want to be part of producing good quality homes. So it would be remiss of me on behalf of the Housing Festival not just to say thank you to you both, because when we came to you 3 years ago with an idea of how can we get a conversation in the city about housing that's a sort of think to do tank, it was an idea, and it takes a bit of courage sometimes to go with ideas that are just ideas on paper. So it's just thank you for your support, your encouragement. We're excited about some of the schemes that are now coming forward, and the truth is it doesn't happen with other people getting on board and creating space for that. So just to say thank you to you both for your support, and we're excited to see what's going to be coming next. So thank you for you both, thank you for your time today. We look forward to get you down on some of these houses and to hand keys over in due course, because I know for a lot of us one of the real motivations is the thought of people moving to their homes and getting that change of life, that transformation of life that kind of drives us all. So thank you both very much.